Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the city of Charleston, South Carolina, a heavy, almost suffocating silence reigned. The fluorescent lights of the central penitentiary cast a cold glow on the concrete walls, and inside, a black man was about to become just another statistic, a victim of injustice. Marcus Jefferson, 32, was accused of a crime he never committed. The armed robbery of a luxury jewelry store had landed him here, despite dubious evidence and witnesses whose memories seemed shaped by fear and prejudice. The lawyers had tried everything, but the biased and blind system had spoken: the death penalty. That morning, Marcus was led into the execution chamber. The metallic clang of the electric chair echoed through the corridor like a death knell. The guards, silent and stoic, stared at him as he was tightly bound. Marcus felt every fiber of his being tremble, not with fear, but with suppressed anger. He had done nothing wrong, and yet, the whole world seemed to be conspiring against him. The priest recited the final prayers. The executioner pressed the button. An electric rumble rippled through the room. And yet, nothing. Marcus felt a searing pain, an explosion of light in his mind, but his body remained unaffected. The process was repeated 8 times. 8 times, the current made the chair tremble and the machine scream, but Marcus survived. The doctors declared the incident an exceptional technical malfunction, but Marcus knew it wasn't an accident. He felt a strange, powerful force coursing through him, an energy he had never known. Death, which had been so close, seemed to have chosen him for another mission. What he didn't yet know was that this survival would trigger a chain of events that would reveal the truth, expose the corruption in the justice system, and change his life forever. The man who was thought to be broken was preparing to defy death and demand justice. Marcus Jefferson was back in his cell, but he was no longer the same man. Surviving the electric chair had left its mark, both physically and psychologically: minor burns, invisible scars, and above all, a silent rage that burned in his eyes. His fellow inmates whispered his name with fear and respect, some believing he was protected by a supernatural force. Night was falling on Charleston, and Marcus sat with his eyes fixed on the gray ceiling, thinking. He knew he'd been framed. The witnesses had lied, the evidence had been tampered with, and behind it all was a web of corruption and institutional racism that he had to unravel. He began to recall every detail of his trial: the inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements, the poorly written police reports, the mysteriously deleted videos. A plan was taking shape in his mind. He hadn't just survived death, he was going to survive the system and overthrow those who had condemned him. His first steps were simple but risky: retrieve the original evidence, contact a former journalist who had always maintained a critical eye on legal cases, and identify those responsible for the conspiracy. Marcus knew that every move had to be calculated. One mistake, and he'd be back in that electric chair, this time with no way out. The click of locks signaled the guards' nightly rounds. Marcus straightened up calmly, a faint smile playing on his lips. The fear was gone, in its place, an icy determination. He was no longer just a prisoner, he was a strategist, a survivor, ready to defy death and demand justice. As night enveloped Charleston, Marcus Jefferson began mentally writing a list of all those who had betrayed him. And he knew one thing for certain: soon, they would regret the day they thought they could break him. Marcus Jefferson knew that remaining passive in his cell would be his biggest mistake. Every day in prison was a waste of time and opportunities. He had to act, but cautiously. His first targets were the evidence: police reports, surveillance videos, and all documents related to his arrest. Thanks to his legal knowledge and keen intuition, he began to build a discreet network among the inmates and even some guards who hadn't yet been corrupted. He wasn't seeking violence, but information. Every conversation, every exchange of glances became a way to gather clues about what had really happened during the jewelry store robbery. One evening, an inmate named Tommy Reynolds, a former computer technician, told him about a secret archive stored in the local district attorney's office. According to Tommy, some surveillance videos had been falsified or even deleted. Marcus felt his heart race. This was the proof he needed to prove his innocence. But he couldn't act alone. Marcus thought of Elizabeth Carter, an independent journalist who had already exposed several corrupt judicial cases. He knew she could help him reveal the truth to the outside world. Through a discreet scheme, he sent a coded message via a longtime friend who was still free. The alarm had been raised. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to observe the guards and fellow inmates. He noted their behavior, memorized their routines, and identified the weaknesses in the prison system. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle. He was preparing for the moment when he could take direct action against those who had orchestrated his conviction. Despite the danger, Marcus felt a strange confidence. His miraculous survival of the electric chair was no coincidence. He had the feeling that something, or someone, was guiding him. And he knew that this miracle must have a purpose. It wasn't just about survival, but about revealing the truth and punishing injustice. As night fell on Charleston, Marcus stood and looked out of the small window of his cell. The city seemed calm, but he knew the storm was approaching. And he, the man they had tried to break, was ready to unleash that storm with deadly precision. The following weeks were a mixture of patience and calculation for Marcus. Every detail, every movement in and outside the prison, had to be analyzed. He knew that the slightest mistake could cost him his freedom, or even his life. Yet, the urgency to prove his innocence burned brighter than any fear. Thanks to Tommy Reynolds, Marcus was able to obtain crucial information. An old server in the district attorney's office contained the original videos from the jewelry store, before they were altered. This was the proof he needed to demonstrate that the crime scene had been tampered with. But retrieving these files wouldn't be easy. The office was heavily secured, and every misstep could be fatal. Marcus decided to play the cunning card. With the help of a discreet guard he had won over through calm and respect, he began to organize a coded document transfer, piece by piece. Each microfilm, each photocopied file, became another step toward freedom. Marcus felt the adrenaline rush, but he remained focused. He wanted to leave nothing to chance. Meanwhile, outside, Elizabeth Carter was receiving encrypted messages and clues left by Marcus. The journalist was beginning to grasp the scale of the conspiracy. Several police officers and officials had falsified evidence to protect an influential criminal network. Elizabeth knew that a public revelation could cause a national scandal. But she had to proceed with caution. Her enemies were powerful and determined to cover everything up. One evening, Marcus finally managed to obtain a complete copy of the original videos. He examined them in the silence of his cell. Each image confirmed his innocence. He had never set foot in the jewelry store on the day of the robbery. Rage surged within him, but it was quickly transformed into determination. He now had the power to strike the guilty where it would hurt the most, their reputation and their careers. But the road ahead was still fraught with obstacles. Several fellow inmates and corrupt guards were beginning to suspect his schemes. Marcus had to act quickly before his plan was discovered. He knew the real battle was only just beginning. His miraculous survival of the electric chair was no longer a mere feat, it was the starting point of a silent war against injustice. As he lay down that night, Marcus felt for the first time a profound certainty. The truth would come out, and those who had thought they could break him would soon realize that they had underestimated a man whom death itself had not been able to touch. Marcus Jefferson knew the decisive moment had arrived. With the original videos and the falsified documents in his possession, he could finally prove his innocence and expose the corrupt network that had framed him. But he had to act strategically. Every move would be watched, every mistake could be fatal. Elizabeth Carter was ready. The journalist had prepared a comprehensive dossier, corroborated by anonymous witnesses and independent analyses of the videos. Together, they arranged a secret meeting in an abandoned building in Charleston, far from prying eyes. Marcus was released from prison under a medical pretext, protected by an unexpected ally among the guards. The tension was palpable, but the man who had defied death was no longer afraid. Their first action was to release an excerpt of the original videos to local media, accompanied by a detailed report on the falsifications and manipulations by the prosecutor and certain corrupt police officers. The effect was immediate, a scandal erupted, and those in charge began to panic. The authorities were forced to open an official investigation. But Marcus didn't just want justice done, he wanted those who had tried to break him to pay for their crimes. Thanks to the evidence, several police officers and officials were suspended and then charged with tampering and corruption. The chief prosecutor, one of the key figures in the conspiracy, was publicly arrested. The public, shocked by the scale of the conspiracy, hailed Marcus as a symbol of resistance and truth. For Marcus, the most important thing was not glory, but inner peace. He had survived the electric chair, cheated death, and restored his honor. He could finally breathe, knowing that his name would no longer be associated with a crime he hadn't committed. As he walked through the streets of Charleston, free and victorious, Marcus felt the wind on his face. Each step resonated like a triumph over injustice. His miraculous survival had not been a mere accident, it had been the beginning of a rebirth, a fight against lies and corruption. The truth had triumphed. And Marcus Jefferson, the man who was thought to be broken, was now invincible.